Alright, showing you the finest setting, and let's see how many grams were retained. There's a look. So, not bad consistency for an $80, well, I don't know how much this grinder is at this time, but under $100 usually. So not bad consistency for this price range. Now let's look at the weight. Yeah, so 2.7 to be precise grams lost. So that is definitely one of the major downsides of this grinder. Okay, that's the finest grind on the Capresso. So this is not going to be suitable for your espresso machine unless you use a pressurized portafilter. So what the hell does that mean? Let's find out. So here's a filter basket, and this is a pressurized filter basket, and you can tell that it's pressurized because it just has one tiny little hole here at the bottom, and usually it's kind of like a double-walled filter basket. A non-pressurized filter basket will have perforations all throughout the bottom of the filter basket. So if you know the distinction, then this is going to be good enough for your pressurized filter basket. So this comes from this machine over here, and that's just a very entry-level espresso machine, but it's not going to get you a fine enough grind for really authentic espresso. So maybe you don't know the difference in the taste, but just thought I'd mention that. Okay, so this is the coarsest grind setting on the Capresso Infinity, and not bad, but really not that consistent. But for a grinder that's in this price range, it's not awful. If you're doing French press, like, you can see that there's different particle sizes here. So to get the most out of your French press coffee, or just your coarse grind in general, you might want to use something like a sieve to filter out the finer particles that are in here. And if you just look around the outskirts of this clump of ground coffee, you can see that there's some particles that are clearly smaller than others. So not going to be a really consistent grind, but at least it gets pretty coarse. So really quick, I'm going to show you how to clean the Capresso Infinity. If you take a look right here, you'll see that dot lines up with the coarsest setting. If you turn it further to the right, once the dot lines up with this white mark here, you just lift up the hopper like that. Now let me say something about this hopper real quick. It is very tricky to clean. I don't know if you can tell, but there's this kind of cone shape in the inside that keeps the beans from flying up towards the top of the hopper when it's grinding. That's the purpose of this, and getting under there to clean can be pretty difficult. Similarly, when you're coming from the bottom with your sponge or whatever you're using to wipe this down, there's some nooks and crannies that are hard to get to. As far as the burr goes, or the burrs I should say, you have this little ring that comes off, and this one has clearly been stained from many years of use. And you can still see some beans here in the hopper. So remember when we were talking about the ground retention, there's definitely some with this, but if you keep running the timer or the grinder even past the point that you think it's done grinding, you'll be able to get more ground coffee out of this. So the retention is something that is kind of dependent on how long you're running this timer, but there are going to be some grounds left behind, and I'll show you where that primarily occurs. So this comes off really easily. You just lift it up, and here's the upper burr. So you'll want to clean that from time to time, and that's not hard to do. And then there's the lower burr, and the chute is actually down here somewhere, and also a little bit tricky to get into. It's under kind of a rim, so somewhat of a downside, I'd say, but to clean this grinder, it's really not too hard. You just flip it upside down, use a brush, and get out all that extra ground coffee, oils, whatever. All right, so finally, when we're talking about cleaning, let's go down to the basket here. So you can see there's some ground coffee in there that was left behind. It sneaks behind the receptacle here, and that drives me nuts. One of the definite downsides of this grinder. There's the chute. I don't want to go too far over because I'm going to spill the beans out, but that's where it is. And then once you're done cleaning behind there, what you want to do from time to time, you can just reattach the hopper, make sure that the black dot, once again, that the black dot lines up with the white, and turn it back. There's the lid. Alright, so let me tell you what I like about this grinder and what I dislike about this grinder. The Capresso Infinity Burr grinder, I would say, is a very durable and affordable entry-level burr grinder. This is the first one that I ever owned, and at the time that I bought it, I believe it was around 90 bucks. So you're not going to usually find a lot of durable burr grinders in that range, but this is one of the most popular options for sure, and I think it's because of the price. Quite frankly, it's a nice entry-level burr grinder. It will definitely improve your results if you're using a blade grinder, or were using a blade grinder before this. And as far as settings go, I mean, let's see, you've got 16 total settings. That's not a lot of range, but there's definitely a nice discrepancy between fine and coarse. This will definitely do the trick for an auto drip, and a pretty decent job with other brew methods like French press if you're using a sieve, and if you're doing pour over, it will also be good enough. Not great, but good enough. So affordable, durable. I've had this for 4 or 5 years. This is now in my parents' kitchen, so they're still using it every day. And really, they don't actually clean it at all. And I'm not suggesting that you do that, but it gets along just fine using dark roast coffee like Pete's on a daily basis and at fine settings. So what I like about this guy is that it doesn't really get clogged up. It's pretty low maintenance. Now, I will say that a downside is that it's difficult to clean, as I showed you, and there's a lot of awkwardness with this grounds basket in my opinion. I would have preferred a circular shape, something about it, just It's kind of, especially pouring it into something like an AeroPress, it's difficult to pour. I know that sounds like kind of a nitpicky complaint, but you'll see what I mean if you ever use this thing. And also the grounds that get kind of left behind, retained, that is a definite downside here. You're not gonna get the same output as your input. So if you put in 20 grams of coffee, you'll likely get something 18 to 19 grams back. So that is a major downside to me. And then finally, just the limited number of settings and the overall consistency. This isn't going to be your most consistent burr grinder by any means, but for the price, it's probably up there. Now, I will say that I think something like a Hario Mini Mill or Skirtin is going to give you a more consistent grind than this Capresso Infinity, which is, let's see, probably at least twice as much in terms of cost, but it will be much quicker than those manual grinders. And if you do want that consistency, you can pay probably about, I'd say $30 to $50 more for a burrazza, and it will be well worth it in my opinion. If you really can't justify spending more than $100, then I would go with this grinder probably. But if you can put up with grinding manually maybe, or spending, $40 extra for something that grinds a little bit more consistently, then I would for sure go with something like a Lido or a Baratza Encore. So there you have it. This is the long overdue review of the Capresso Infinity burr grinder. A nice entry-level option, but it's got some painful downsides in my opinion, which ultimately led me to moving on to something different. And currently I'm using the Breville Smart Grinder Pro, but that costs twice as much as this. So fine for starting out with, but there's probably a few better ones that you could go with for a little bit extra money.